There we go. Good evening. We're grateful that you're here tonight. This is week 5 of our Big Questions series this summer. This evening, I have several of my friends that I want to take a few minutes and introduce to you and give them a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll share a little bit about our topic for the evening and our conversation. So Matt, why don't you start us off, and then we'll kind of go around and let everybody kind of introduce themselves, and then we'll jump in.
All right, Kaufman, what's happening? My name is Matt. I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I'm the preaching minister at University Church of Christ out here. Las Cruces is in the kind of the southernmost point of New Mexico. We've been here for 2 years. We've been in New Mexico for about 11 and a half years now. So it's good to see all of you this evening.
Cool, so my name is Joshua Jackson. I'm the lead minister here at the Rural Hill Church of Christ. My wife Tina and I, we have been serving here since January 1. Antioch is right outside of Nashville, so a little suburb area. And just grateful to be a part of this conversation and to be with you all this evening.
Jim.
Hey guys, it's Jim, Canada. Not sure if all of you guys remember me, but I loved being with you guys. I think it was about a year ago, wasn't it, Doug?
Yeah, maybe 2 now. I don't remember, but a year or 2 ago. Mm-hmm.
I was definitely drinking out of my Kaufman Church of Christ coffee mug this morning and thinking about you guys and hoping all you all are doing well. If you don't remember, I'm at the very top part of the lower peninsula of Michigan. So we are in the place where we call Northern Michigan, right below the Mackinac Bridge. And I'm really glad to get a chance to talk with you guys.
So, church, in case you are not aware, these guys are good friends of mine, and I know many of you have told me before you enjoy meeting my friends and people that I have relationships with in various parts of the country. The 4 of us are a part of a group of preachers that get together every fall, and we kind of jokingly refer to our gathering as preacher camp. And we meet up in some part of the country and just hang out to encourage each other and spend some time together, trying to ensure that we are able to continue to do ministry for the long haul. So these guys are dear friends, and I'm grateful for their time tonight to have a conversation. We'll probably talk about a lot of different things, but I want to start with, and we'll get to kind of some specific things at the end, but I want to kind of just start generally. I thought it would be interesting just for you guys to share about a few things that you have seen in your churches and also personally in your own lives during this season. What have been some things that have been difficult for you and for the people in your churches, people in your circles of relationships during this season? So Matt, I don't know if you want to jump in and start, and then we can kind of just go around the same way we introduced.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think some of the more challenging things for us and for our people at church and people in the city, New Mexico is obviously different than the other states that we're in, and so the changing information, communication, how to communicate, all of that, and then at the same time, people being all over the map of agree, disagree, or I like this, or I hate this, and then one end especially for us as ministers, and is all the stuff that is having to happen behind the scenes that's really just felt like nonstop, and in ministry, people just don't see that. And so that's been tough, I think, for our people, not being able to see each other or to have that in-person contact, or not being able to be, in close proximity with each other. And in some ways, not being able to be in proximity with other people, but then having to be in close proximity with like their families. It has really brought out, like, if there's any relational fractures in, in their relationships, fathers, sons, daughters, moms, sons, daughters, husbands and wives, that those things, like the pressure of that close proximity, we've seen it like really, really magnify some of those things. So people just have a tough time, really having to manage lots of frustrations. So
that's good.
Those things have been challenging for sure.
That's good. Josh, what about you? You got anything to add to that?
So I will definitely say, like, just the whole relational isolation part has been quite difficult. Personally, I mean, so I was 3 months into a new job, a new context, whole new community of members, and COVID hit. So, they're filling me out. I'm learning to fill them out. So that's been kind of unique. I would never say that that's ideal for starting a ministry job. That 3 months in, you're going completely online and isolated from everybody in the congregation. But I'm grateful it has gone well. They've been very, very gracious and merciful and loving toward us, even from a distance. But that's been unique. But I think also just learning how to do ministry in a time like this. I mean, there's no hospital visits because, you couldn't get in the hospital. You can't go see people. Even when people are having really difficult moments or even joyous moments, trying to find a way of celebrating and affirming certain things, and even being present when you can't physically be present. That's been different. And so trying to navigate that. And then also just how to take care of myself in a time like this. As a minister, I had a lot of free time in a sense, but you really don't have a lot of free time. It's kind of unique. You're doing a lot more Zoom calls. You're doing a lot more FaceTimes and phone calls. And I don't know about you guys, but after a while of seeing so many Zoom calls, it's kind of like Zoom fatigue. You're like, man, I'm tired of looking at a screen. And so that kind of kicked in, kind of trying to process that. Like, how do I limit how much time I spend on my computer, or how much time I spend on my phone or my iPad, which normally you could break that up with relationships and going to be with people, where when you're isolated, it's like, well, I go from Zoom call to Netflix and to playing a game on my phone to reading on my Kindle. And it's like, I just really have to put these devices down and find a new way of life, a new rhythm of life.
That's good. Jim, what about you?
Yeah. So one of the things I've been thinking about this weekend in particular is, obviously it is July 4th weekend, and we're thinking about freedom and independence. And there is a palpable tension between what we normally celebrate on this weekend and what we're actually going through as a people. Because we really have some things that are being told to us that we need to abide by. And, we can choose to opt out of those things, but the stakes are pretty high. And so we're wrestling with that in our community about, okay, how do we do what's best for everyone? And one of the things that we talked about actually at church yesterday was that American freedom, which we all love, and it's no surprise to you guys that I love American freedom because I don't like being told what to do. But the truth is that our Christian freedom is the exact opposite of that. It's the freedom to be liberated to do what's best for everyone else. And so thinking about that, I mean, whether it's wearing masks and arguing about that, or whether it's talking about various different types of protests that exist, really like sinking into Galatians 5 and thinking about the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness, and self-control. And how do we manifest those things? And how do we stay in contact with the Spirit so that we see those things being manifested in us in a time like this? And so that's kind of what we've been wrestling with up here.
That's good. Yeah, I want to kind of go off script a little bit here and just maybe follow that train of thought for a second, Jim, and we'll come back to the question that's after the one that I had. But
Okay.
Way to go, Jim.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I want to think some more about this idea of that we're freed to be liberated for the sake of others. Is I think how you said that. And
Yeah.
I was actually talking to someone at church yesterday as well, and we were talking about a very similar idea that I think so much of what we're kind of the time we're living in, we're being asked to do certain things, and most of us are not used to being asked or / told to do certain things, and so we kind of push back against that. But in reality, as you said, there is something it's very much the case that when we agree to follow Jesus, that what we agree to is to lay down some of our own rights, right? Some of our own, so that if I want to do XYZ thing and Jesus says I shouldn't do that, or that I should do this instead, that I don't get a choice in that matter. It's that Jesus's word, overrules whatever it is whatever desire that I have. So
that's what you signed up for. Yeah,
that's right. And so, I mean, let's kind of dig into that a little bit. And I think one of the ways that I have talked about that with some other people here in Kaufman, and I'd be curious to kind of get you guys just to respond and maybe share your thoughts. It feels like a little bit that part of through this pandemic and all the social issues around conversations around race, that one of the things that's been exposed is the idol that we've made out of our individuality, and how we've sort of propped up that idea of what I want, me, myself, and I, whatever it is, my goals, my dreams, my aspirations, my opinions, whatever it is, those things are up here. And I, it feels like it took a pandemic maybe to expose that in some really honest and real ways. And I think that's related to, you referenced both the race conversation and things like wearing masks. I think either one of those could apply. There's probably some other examples of that too, just, whether it be being asked to shelter in place at our homes or where we're getting our information. Well, I know if your churches are like mine, it's like, well, you got Washington, D.C. saying one thing, you've got Austin, Texas saying another thing, you've got the CDC and the World Health Organization saying something else. You've got, local health authorities saying something, and there's all kinds of information. So it gets confusing as to who to listen to. How do I weigh different voices? And so we kind of default to ourselves. Well, I guess I'll just decide what I want to do. And if I want to do it, I'll do it. And if I don't, you can't tell me not to. Right. So, I'm guessing, I guess maybe the question there is like, maybe Matt or Josh, Jim, I guess Jim already kind of said he saw that a little bit there in Petoskey. So maybe Josh or Matt, you guys might respond to this first, and then we can, Jim could chime back in. But are you guys seeing some of the same things at Antioch and Las Cruces, of how that idol of individuality and maybe that's a hard way to say it. I don't know. Maybe there's a better way to say that. But and if you're seeing that, I'd be curious, kind of how you might describe what it is that you're seeing in your context.
Go
Josh,
for it, Matt.
All right, I'll go. One of the things that has been, I think, maybe a little surprising, maybe it shouldn't have been surprising to me, but through all of this, when we going through all of the COVID-19 stuff, and then when the race issue took center stage, it was surprising to me that it's been hard to talk about like king and kingdom in the middle of all of this. And because before this, I feel like we would talk about those kind of things, and those conversations were more readily accepted. Of course, God's king, and we're part of living in His kingdom and advancing His kingdom. But then when our own stuff is threatened, and our own, rights and all of those things, well, then it's then like, oh, I don't know if I want to talk about king and kingdom anymore, because it's this whole lordship thing. Jesus as Lord, and I love to talk about Jesus as, just because I'm a relational guy, I love to talk about Jesus in this, deep friendship with him, but it's been more difficult to talk about Jesus as Lord, Master, Boss, because I think those things are really like, okay, well, who's the boss and who's your boss? Is it Jesus like we say it is, or is it whatever political affiliation that you have, or whichever way that you lean, left, right, or whichever news preference that you have, or where you get, like you were talking about, Doug, where you get your information from, and then those kind of things really start coming out, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't really know if people want to hear about Jesus as Lord, Master, Boss, because he has a lot to say about everything that we're going through, about laying down our own rights, our own lives, and radically serving and thinking about other people before ourselves. And he has a whole lot to say about the race issue. And all of a sudden, we don't want to hear what he has to say because my own things are being affected, my own rights and my own, look at how, this is a slippery slope to, all these things happening. And now it's like, well, who's really Lord, Master, Boss? How much time are we spending going through and listening to all of these different sources and matching that up with how much time I'm actually listening to the Lord about any of this? And I think those, through all of this, have been way out of balance.
That's good.
So that's kind of what we've seen.
Yeah, it's been very similar for our context. One of the things that I love about my church is the actual diversity of this church. I've never been at a Church of Christ that had this level of diversity. So 40% white, 40% African American, 20% Hispanic. And we're trying to make this all work. And so with that level of diversity, you can only imagine not only are there race issues, cultural issues, language concerns, there's everything that individuals have along with the diversity that it brings. Yeah. And so as beautiful as the diversity is, it's also challenging. And so, being the only person of color on staff, having a conversation around some of these difficult things, I think one of the things that was just kind of overlooked just immediately. So, when things started going into the race conversation, the very first Sunday, after the George Floyd situation, and ministers were like, so what are you preaching? What are you preaching? And we were just starting a series in Joseph. And I remember going in to record the sermon that Friday. I had just gotten off of a phone conversation for a radio show talking about it. I had been up late that night watching things happening where they were burning the CNN building in Atlanta and some of the other burnings that were going across in Minneapolis. And so that was that Thursday night. That Friday, I'm like, look, man, I just really don't want to deal with this right now. It's too much right now. So I go in, I preach my sermon, and I talked to one of my elders, and he was like, we kind of had a conversation. He's like, do you want to redo it? Do you want to go back and say something? And I said, nah, it's just too raw right now. There's nothing I could say that'd be helpful right now. I'm just not in a good place. And I said that to him. And so the sermon goes as normal on Sunday. And so I get calls and text messages from many of my Black members who are like, you didn't say anything. You didn't acknowledge it. You didn't address it. And so I was like, look, it's not that I'm tone deaf, but you got to remember that, yes, I'm the minister, but I'm also a Black man in America who's experienced a lot of these things. And what I can't do is go up there and bleed on the church. I don't get to use the pulpit as a therapy session. And that's all I would have done had I would have addressed it. Because my anger, my frustration, the hurt that's in me would come out. And if I do that, I automatically alienate a good 40% of the congregation. I was like, so I need you to, I'm not saying that you need to agree with me, but recognize the position I'm in and trying to communicate these things. And I was like, and I'm not doing it intentionally to hurt anybody or to scapegoat these conversations. I was like, I'm deeply committed to these conversations and even more so the solutions. But one of the things that I noticed, like by going through that and having that as a church, and I say this both in my local context, but even churches in general, I don't think we're really good at handling conflict at all.
Mm.
I think COVID kind of showed us that initially, and then what's happening in our nation in terms of race, but even like in the systems of reopening, like, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, Doug, like that individualism, that I want my way, I want it the way I want it. And even though we might not say that it's based on our individualism, which is selfishness and self-centeredness, that's what it is. And ultimately it's sinfulness.
Right.
That's what the Bible would say. we don't see it that way. It's almost like this is what it means to be a good American. And I think what Matt was hitting on is that's kind of the tension of the biblical text, and what we're called to be as Christ followers is that being a good American and being a good Christ follower are not synonymous. Actually, they're very much opposites. There's some things that are threats to the kingdom of God that we hold dear as American citizens. And as Jim was saying, like as a body coming together, there are some things I have to give up. Do I want to wear a mask? No. But are there people in my congregation who need me to wear one? Yes. So what I do is I put on a mask because they need me to wear one. And I love them enough to do so. And I don't argue about it. Is it my personal preference? No. Is it everybody's personal preference? No. Are there people who would love to come and us just have worship like it used to be? Of course. But we can't do that because, one, there are guidelines that say we can't do that. But two, because we care enough about one another that it's necessary that we take these precautions for everyone else's sake, even if it doesn't affect you personally. And I think trying to talk through that language, I think, like Matt said, when things are going fine, it's a lot easier to talk about those conversations when there's nothing at stake. But when there's something on the line and trying to have this, and you're telling me that I have to give up something, then it feels like my rights are being threatened. And it's like, well, wait a minute. No, you willingly gave up your right when you said, I'm going to follow Jesus. Your rights aren't being threatened. You're actually trying to take them back after you said that you died to self. And so I saw that even in myself, of having to walk through this and then having to try to coach the rest of our congregation. And I'm grateful for my leadership of who's been, honestly, they've done a great job of walking us through this and kind of reminding the congregation, look, no plan we're going to come up with is going to satisfy everybody. There's always going to be people who are going to be upset. But are you willing to submit to the plan for the sake of others? And some people are like, yeah, sure, we're willing to do that. We love each other enough to do it. And some people are like, well, until X, Y, and Z happens, I'm not showing back up. Well, that kind of shows where Jesus is in your life. That's a clear indication that maybe Jesus isn't so much for you as he should be. So it really has been, I think the pandemic has exposed some of our hypocrisy of Christianity in our churches and how we operate.
Wow, that's good. I want to, before Jim, I wanted you to chime in on that too. But I want something that Josh said. I was texting with a friend of mine a few weeks ago, and a phrase that he used, David Taylor, if you're watching this, I'm giving you a little shout out here, that he used resonated with me, and it's something Josh touched on was similar. But he said, maybe part of this is I'm reading the text, direct quote here. He said, maybe part of the situation is that for so many of us, we never thought we'd have to use this church stuff in real life or say it out loud or actually change anything. And I think that, it feels like kind of like this is our Good Samaritan moment. For most of us, that's just been a really good story that we've read. It's got some power to it. It's got some application that we've made in various places and at various times. But that this is one of those moments for us where we're looking around and we're like, man, there's all kinds of opportunities to actually apply. Who is my neighbor, right? Oh, you mean the person that I least want to be my neighbor is actually my neighbor, and I've got an opportunity laying out in front of me on a daily basis to apply these texts that we've read that we consider sacred, and that we have honestly, We've studied for years and years and years, and now we're having to apply, and it's uncomfortable to apply them. And the application of them is pushing us to make a decision, I think, about what do we really believe? Who do we really follow, to use Matt's language? Who really is our King? Who really is our Lord? Are we the Lord of our own lives, or is Christ the Lord of our own lives? So those are good. Those are good thoughts. Jim, why don't you chime in about that point, and then we'll kind of keep the conversation going.
Who told you that you were naked? That's one of the first things that gets said in our scriptures about God speaking to us and telling us, you don't know what's going on. And we have run to the fig leaves of Fox News and MSNBC and all of these other places to protect us and to show us, man, tell us what we're supposed to think. And one of the things that has devastated me in the last year is that I am deeply and completely in love with our faith, our history, and the richness that brings to the world. And we seem to not value that. And so we go to these other places to tell us what we're supposed to think and to do. And I'm comfortable saying plainly, as you guys know, that if our opinions are being informed on the news instead of in our churches, I've read the Bible. That makes us the bad guys.
Yeah. Wow, that's good. I said a couple weeks ago, I said, and I said in a sermon, this was a little bit of a confessional moment here, as we were back to physical worship gatherings. So we're pre-recording our worship services for the folks that are watching online, and then I'm actually preaching live as well on Sundays, which we've done just now for a few weeks. And when I preached the online sermon, I used a phrase that I chickened out and didn't say to the live audience. But I'm saying it here now for those live people who were there who might have missed it. But I think it's in line with what Jim just said, and that is that I think if our opinions are being more informed by, the phrase I used was, if our opinions are more informed by, or they sound more like a donkey or an elephant than they do a lamb, then we need to check those opinions. Because the reality is that. And it's not all about political stuff. It's all, that shades everything, I think. But in some ways it's just, I don't know how much of our generation watches the news at all, but we certainly are on social media constantly. So, it may not be so much CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, but it might be Twitter or Facebook or somewhere else, right? Instagram or whatever you're on. And I think that's to your point, Jim, that like, we've run to these other fig leaves. I love that image. We've run to these other fig leaves to tell us what to think. So you may be going to say something else, but I jumped in to cut off.
Oh, that's all right. So I could tell you a couple stories. One of which is I was talking to somebody just a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about wearing masks.
Uh-huh.
And I told them that I don't like wearing them. And I hesitated initially about wearing them. And then eventually something clicked with me. And they were like, well, I just don't want to do that. And I'm like, well, do you realize that there are people that are very scared and very upset when you don't wear one? And they said, well, that's not my problem. And I literally showed them Philippians chapter 2. On my phone. I pulled up the Bible app on my phone and said, look at this. Consider others before yourself. And they said, I didn't know that was in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
That is a Christian crisis. We don't understand that this is literally the promise that we made in our baptism, was to look out for other people before ourselves. And if we don't get that, how literally in God's name are we going to figure out how to untie these things? And so I've had other stories too that we can get into, particularly with racial stuff, if we want to get into that as well. But we are the people of God, and we were called to follow Jesus, who is a person that will literally lay down body and blood for the benefit of other people. That's the promise we made in our baptism.
Yeah, that's a good word.
If you were baptized by somebody that didn't tell you that, I'm very sorry, but that's the agreement that you made.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so that we kind of set the problem. I'm curious, maybe now we turn a little bit of a corner. Not that we're going to solve it. I have if you guys, my church knows me, and I never think that big questions like this, big conversations like this, I'm not naive enough to believe that they're going to get solved in one night. But I am curious.
Oh, what are we doing then?
Right, that's right. I'm curious what you guys might say. Like, what do we do? What do we do, knowing that this exists, right? Like that this is this is the place where we are. This is the world that we live in. This is the tension that we feel, that we know is real, that's there. Are there steps that you guys think of, and how we deal with, we can take, and how we deal with what I think of as kind of heart issues? Josh, appropriately pointed out that Scripture calls it sin. This sin of selfishness, the idol of individuality. Where do we go from here? I mean, are there things that we can do in taking some steps to grow in this area? Maybe, I don't know how to ask that question exactly, but you think of something. I see Josh, Matt, and I see y'all all nodding, but Josh, why don't you start us off, and then we'll kind of see where that question goes.
So yeah, I think just on a practical level, that we have to get better at kind of being able to take a breath in those moments when my initial reaction kind of sets me off. So when people say things that I don't necessarily agree with on first hearing it, or when all I do is listen to people who are part of my echo chamber, they automatically just reinforce what I already think or what I already believe. Before I just start sending off those emails or posting all those comments on Facebook, or if that's on people I hang out with, I need to broaden my circles, and I need to go into it looking to listen and to understand, and not to dominate the conversation and make people see it from my vantage point. I think that's one of the things that we can definitely do. But I also think, just in a very practical level of being the church, and I don't think this is going to be super easy, but I think we really have to do it. I think we really have to understand what the Bible actually teaches. I think that we have good language for the Bible, but I think a lot of that language has been co-opted by worldly things. And so we make certain biblical terms synonymous with worldly understanding. And I think we have to do a better job in the church of reclaiming our identity, separate and apart from what it means to be a good citizen of the world. And going even further than that, I think that very first step is just saying there's no such thing as good people. That's hard to admit, but I think that's kind of where we get ourselves in trouble, is that, well, I'm a good person. And it's like, well, no, there's no such thing. There are no good people. All people are sinful. All people have evil in their hearts. And so when I can admit that I'm not a good person and I need saving, I need salvation, then I'm a little bit more humble about the way how I navigate life and how I deal with other people. When I stop giving myself a pass, because it's a lot easier to judge someone else and make excuses for my behavior than it is to own my behavior and be merciful to someone else. And that starts when I'm able to tell myself, I'm not that good of a person. That's just a way of me making myself feel better and able to judge them or able to put them and demean them without having to deal with my deep-rooted issues.
That's good.
I think if, just piggybacking off of what Josh was saying about, like, this echo chamber, one of the things that in all of this that's been hard is, we talk about, like, where are you getting your information from? Well, so much of it is not coming from actual conversations with other human beings,
right.
Where you're actually looking at somebody and talking to somebody. And if it is coming from conversations with other people, then it's just people that are reinforcing, or it seems like it's just people that are reinforcing whatever it is that you already thought going into the conversation. And so, it's just a symptom of when Josh was talking about, like churches in general aren't good in conflict. You scale that down, like relationally, we're not good in conflict because we have a hard time sitting across from somebody that we don't agree with fully and having an actual conversation with them. And so then when we're coming together and we're sharing all of the information that we've gathered, it's not from the primary source of this information that I've gathered has not come from another person that I've had to relationally sacrifice and sit across from and listen to. This is what I think. This is what scares me. I mean, this has been one of my favorite questions through all this. What about this scares you? Because then now we can get to the actual heart of something, and now we can meet on that level and talk about, like, yeah, when I hear this or when I see this, it scares me. And so then for me, it's like, oh, okay, well, I can be on board with. I know what it's like to be scared about something, and I can empathize with you, and I can relate to you, and I can connect with you in that. But when you're just pulling all these facts from all of these places and information and from people that you don't even know who they are, you're just kind of saying what they're saying, and you're throwing this at me. That's hard for me to relate to. And that's hard for me to relate to. And then there's never any constructive conversation. There's never any constructive reconciliation. It's just, well, here's my facts, and then you present yours, and we're nowhere nearer each other in the middle of all of this, where we just absolutely have to be driving towards each other and finding ways to connect each other on a real, just basic humanity level.
That's good. And I think it's so important to lean into relationships instead of, and exposing ourselves to actual conversations instead of just sharing the latest meme on social media or, I think the phrase that we've all heard, I mean, it's easy to be kind of a keyboard warrior when you're behind a phone and typing it on your phone, or you're behind a computer or something like that. But I think, being in authentic relationships, I think is huge. And that thought about not being good at handling conflict that Josh made resonated with me too. So I'm glad you brought that back up, because I think it does, man. It applies to our individual lives just as much as it does our churches. We generally, I mean, Jim likes conflict, but most people don't,
I don't like it. I'm just comfortable with it.
I know. Yeah. I'm just messing with you.
I think you like it.
I like it.
Speaking of which, can I say a few things?
Please.
Tell him no.
So to answer your question, how do we deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
In the spirit of the Apostle Paul, I would say, just don't be a moron. Which is to say, think in nuanced ways.
That's good.
Think about the fact of who we're actually led by. Think about the fact that when I was a youth, it's no secret, I had some wayward years when I was a kid, and I got, stopped by cops and, patted down and messed with when I wasn't even doing anything wrong. And then my friends that were brown and black, they were like, do you know that happens to us? Literally, like, sometimes when we just go into the store to, like, buy a soda. And so I got to learn as a teenager the inequities of the society that we live in. And so that primed me to be at a place where I am now. And I'll give you a couple seconds, Doug, in case you want to edit this out. But, like, you don't get to be a Christian and not agree that Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Because there are things that we have to deal with in the culture that we live in that are really messed up. And one of my friends that was standing over my shoulder when I got patted down for no reason and was telling me, hey, this happens to me all the time because of the pigment of my skin. was Jesus. He stood right there and said, you know, I wish I was white so that this didn't happen to me. We've got to deal with this, man.
Yeah.
It's not okay. And we got to deal with all the other stuff. We got to deal with the fact that we are so easily co-opted like children by our political parties telling us what we're supposed to believe and what we're supposed to do. And we've got to transcend that. Like, that's our legacy. And literally, I don't care if anybody hears anything else I have to say on this entire call or talk. The legacy that we have as the children of God is that we were always and have always been the people that step outside of what everybody else is doing, and we follow Jesus no matter what.
Yeah.
And we've got to do it. Our times are desperate, and we've never needed people to do it more than we do right now. And I really honestly believe, Doug, I've been at your church. Matt, I've been at your church. Josh, I haven't been at your church yet, but
it's happening.
Christians all over this country.
Barely been to his church.
You're right about that at this point.
The people of God, dude, as much as we get messed up, we're all human, man. Yeah. As much as we get messed up with all of this stuff, we have this thing inside of us that the Spirit implanted in us in our baptism that we desperately want to do what's right. And we want to manifest the kingdom, but there are so many other forces that are pulling us in other directions.
That's right.
But I believe that if we look deeply inside of ourselves, if we pray, if we beg God to manifest that in us, that we can be the people that show up and actually make a difference.
Yeah.
So I want to piggyback on something you said, Jim, especially like that you said earlier when you talked about who told you were naked. Like, I think that this is kind of the root of what we're talking about for what's not just happening now, but what has always been the fight for humanity. So the thing that Eve is offered is not just the fruit of the tree, but she believes that I'm missing something, and that by taking this, I will obtain something that I don't have or that I am not able to get right now. And so what Satan offers her in the garden is her own God complex. And so this is my opportunity to rule for myself and to do what I want. So I don't have to be less than if I can get this. I can be more, only to find out that what she desires is not something that God is willing to offer her. You can't be God. There's only one. You were made to be less than, and you will always be less than. You can't be more than that. You can be human, and you have dominion over everything on the earth except for one another, but everything else you have dominion over. And so when you see what happens at the end of chapter 3 with the fall, or the 3 falls, there is a brokenness between humanity and God, between humanity and itself, because it says to Eve that your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Prior to that, man and woman have the same function. They are both called to rule over the earth and have dominion in Genesis 1. And you see the brokenness between the rest of creation and humanity. And what Jesus does in the gospel, and this is why I think the gospel is so important if we taught the fullness of it. And I think, Doug, you said you've been preaching through Philippians, right? So Philippians 2:5 is the story of the gospel. Jesus reconciles all 3 broken relationships.
That's it.
And he says that if anybody should have had privilege, that Jesus should have had privilege. He was made in God, or this is God in human form, but instead he decided to lay down his privilege as God and live as a human being for the sake of others. And Paul says, let this mindset be in you that was also in Christ Jesus. That is verse 5 of Philippians 2. And then he tells what the mindset is, that Jesus, who was God, decided to humble himself and didn't think of being God as something to be grasped, even to the point of dying on the cross. So you're telling me that I have to lay down my God complex and my self-centeredness?
Yeah.
Exactly. If anybody had a reason to boast and be proud, it was Jesus.
Yeah.
And he can do it. We have to do it. And why do we do it? For the sake of the rest of the world, to redeem it and to reconcile it back for God. And so I think that we're calling into question, like Matt was saying, like our true allegiance. Who really is my king? Who really is my Lord? Is God really God for me? Or is God more like a good bumper sticker, or, a kind of a get out of jail free card, or, a draw 4 in Uno or something that I'm waiting till the last minute? Like, when the deck is stacked against me. Like, how is God like the slot machines that I'm waiting to pull when things go bad? Or am I deeply rooted in the message of God, in the message of Scripture, and called what Jesus is actually telling me to live out? And I get that there's that internal wrestling with it. I don't think any of us does it perfectly, but I think it's really hard for the church to be a credible witness when there's no difference, as Jim was saying. Like, we've been called to be counter to the rest of the culture and to help transform culture, not to conform to culture. And that's really hard to do. Like, I get it, but we have our work cut out for us. We've agreed to do this.
That's good. And I'll say too, I think that one of the reasons, there's lots of reasons why this matters. You guys have laid out several of those. It's, Jim talked about, I mean, we have to be honest about these things, right? And I think that starting with what Matt was saying a minute ago about thinking about who is Lord of our lives, what we were baptized into when we were baptized, and then what are we willing to give up in this God complex that Josh, that you just referenced. And I just really believe that one of the reasons why this is so important is I know that all of us desire deeply I want to make faith possible for the next generation after me. And, I think about, you guys have met my oldest daughter, Allie, who's 15, and her and I were having a conversation. She's really bright and perceptive about things. And she said to me the other day, I wish we could have more conversations about, we were specifically talking about stuff around the topic of race and, racial justice and that kind of thing. And she said, I wish we could have more conversations about things like that. But I know it's not easy. I know it's hard for people, and she was thinking about our church, but just people in general. And I said to her, yeah, but I said, I think that's part of what we're trying to do is keep the conversation going. And she finished my sentence for me. She said, because I said something like, I want to push people enough that it makes them think. And then she finished my sentence and said, but not push them so much that they break, and I said, yeah, maybe so, maybe that's right. But I think what she was articulating was this stuff matters to her. Right. And I think she's one person in that generation. So I'm not going to say she's like everybody in that generation, but I think the fact is that if we turn a blind eye to all the stuff that's going on around us, I think our kids and their kids and everybody in their generation will look at us and go, you guys didn't really believe what you were talking about Jesus. And so I'm not interested in it because you said all these grandiose things about him, but whenever push came to shove, you weren't really willing to do it. And so for me, I mean, that brings tears to my eyes. It motivates me I want to make faith possible for her and for her generation. And I think they're watching us, like Jim said a minute ago. I mean, people who are really thinking about this are watching us, and they're wondering, do these Christians really believe what they've been studying and talking about their whole lives? And so it feels really like, an important historic moment that we need to be sure that we're leaning into and not running from, so. All right. So you guys may have some more to say about that. We can get to that, but I want to maybe have you guys share some positive stories that that are happening or that you've encountered, maybe ways you've seen, maybe some application of what we've been talking about, ways that you've seen the church be the church, maybe ways you've seen people respond to beauty and grace and love during this unique, or respond with those things during this time. Maybe ways that you've seen people lay down their lives and lay down their rights and their opinions and their the idols that they've accumulated for themselves. Are there things that come to mind that you think of that maybe we can leave people with that are just encouraging stories about things that that are happening or that you've seen or witnessed or had conversations about?
So I can definitely say one of the really cool moments, at least for me. So here at my context, we have quite a few law enforcement officers. One that's pretty high up is a Hispanic gentleman at my church. Another one that's part of Metro Nashville Police is an African American gentleman. And then we have some former law enforcement. But just having conversations with them, one of the really special things that they've been able to talk about is just not just like the negative side, obviously, of what all's happening in terms of that. But one of the things that one of the gentlemen said to me, he said that this moment right here is forcing us to get beyond just the titles and just those quick labels. And he said, you know, when people say things like Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, he said, but then are we willing to actually pour into any of those lives, or do we just like to put up hashtags?
Mm.
He said, so his family is out there marching, and he's a police officer, a Black police officer is marching in his uniform with the Black Lives Matter movement. To see that with his family, with his uniform on, and he says that I don't have to be one or the other. I'm a Black man who understands what it's like to feel race and to experience race and experience racism. But I also know what it's like to have my job. And he said, so why does it have to be one or the other? And I remember him he was telling me this, and he said, I think this is kind of what's breaking down a lot of our conversations, is that you either have to be in one camp or the other, all these false dichotomies.
Yes.
And so that, for me, to see that picture and to have that conversation with him has really been a bright spot, because it reminds me that oftentimes that's kind of how we see conversations, that it either has to be either or.
Yes. Yes.
And we forget that there are often times when it can actually be a both and, or there could be a completely third new way that we haven't even attempted to lean into, or even to imagine, or to even want to create. But if we let the world dictate these dichotomies, then we can create walls where they really don't need to be. We might have a lot more in common than we want to admit, but we don't know that because of the dichotomies.
Thank you, Josh. Hey, all of you guys know Maddie.
Yep.
What's up, Maddie?
Hey, Maddie.
All right.
Nice sweatshirt, Maddie.
Yeah.
The either or thing, I think, is huge, man. I think that we're so much of what we listen to and hear, those fig leaves that Jim was referencing, you know, they want to give you the two options they want to dangle out in front of you are the either or. Pick this or pick this. You got to be in one of these camps. And I do think so much of following Jesus is that third way that you're talking about, that there's an alternative option alternative way of thinking about whatever it is that, you know, and that Jesus doesn't fit into our nicely created boxes, you know, which is, it'd be more comfortable if he did, but unfortunately that isn't the way that it usually works out.
You know, the challenge is whether or not you actually care about the Bible or have read it. Because
I know what you mean, but elaborate on that just real quickly.
I wanted to introduce you guys to Maddie, because this girl was baptized 5 years ago on Easter Sunday. So that's almost like a double baptism. And she said to me when all of this stuff was going on, and this girl has been bathed in Christianity and the love of Christ, and she was absolutely baffled when she got on the internet and realized that there was some sort of other side to Black Lives Matter. And she said to me, literally, she's like, Dad, there are people saying that Black Lives Matter, and it kind of bothers me that we even have to say that. But I'm really, really upset because some people seem to think that there's another side to that argument. And I bring that up, and that's not even political. This is a Christian child who is experiencing the things that are going on. And her Christ-like heart says, it seems almost not even worth saying that Black Lives Matter, because of course they do. And then when she heard that people actually wanted to somehow argue with that, she was devastated and didn't understand. And then, and I'm not kidding you, when she found out that some of those people were, quote, Christian, I had to talk to her for like 5 hours to try and help her understand how that was even a thing. Because she literally asked me, she's like, Dad, how is it possible? Like, these people are our brothers and sisters. How can they possibly not just like agree that, of course, Black Lives Matter?
Which I think, Jim, to me, the thing I hear is that, you hear obviously Jesus's language of having faith like a child. And I think that there's some ideas that really aren't that hard to understand, but that we've covered up with. I love that image of the fig leaves that you brought into the conversation. And I think that story about Maddie reveals the ways that we've done that, right? We've allowed these other layers to kind of go on top of our, those, I mean, if you just strip all that away, it doesn't seem, people matter to God. And so, yeah, if there's something in our world that suggests that some of those lives don't matter, then we are the people who stand up and say, no, they do. And that there shouldn't be another side to that conversation, I think is a really, it's a good point. So, anything else about that? Stories, positive stories. Matt, did you have something?
Well, I mean, yeah, some of the really cool stuff that we've seen come out of this has really just been motivated by people having to be creative, and I think having to get back to a place where there's some godly creativity that has to be seen because of who we are, because of who Jesus is, and the Spirit of the Lord in our lives. That should mean something from a creative standpoint if we're going to have to think about doing things differently. But really, one of my favorite stories coming out of all of this was, it's not all that creative. It's just biblical. It's just reading your Bible. Was this church-wide day of prayer and fasting, which you think about it like, oh yeah, we should probably do something like that. And so this was probably 2 weeks after George Floyd incident, and so maybe a week and a half after it, and we had a day that was dedicated to just praying and fasting and seeking the Lord on this. And growing up in New Mexico is just a different thing for a whole lot of people. And so from one standpoint, I didn't grow up in New Mexico. I grew up mostly in the North Dallas area. And so that was, I feel like I grew up in a pretty diverse place. And, but people that have grown up in New Mexico, like my wife, their experience was really different. And so you have this tendency to think, and this is probably true in places all over the world, that, oh yeah, like race, that's not really an issue for us. It's New Mexico. It's, we grew up this way, and white people are the minority here, and so we're just, those issues may be things that happen out there, but not really here, and certainly not in our churches, not in our New Mexico churches. So having this day of prayer and fasting, and then specifically being able to hear from one of our brothers who's he's half black, half white, and people actually being able to hear his reaction and his response to everything that went on, and the weeks after that, and then also to hear about like his actual experiences growing up in New Mexico, and going to church in New Mexico, where and I've talked about this with some of you guys before, where people have this idea, well, in our church, this is our family, And yeah, we know that about this guy. We know, but he's our brother, and so what happened out there doesn't happen or isn't part of his life experience. And then when they do hear that it actually was his life experience, and they don't think, oh, this isn't just some made up story, or we don't think that he's lying to us, then they're confronted with, oh, well, maybe there is really an issue here. And maybe there is something that I need to address in my own heart. And maybe there is there's some ways that my thinking really has to be altered and changed. And I really have to step into that repentant, renewed mind that lines up, my thinking really lines up more with how Jesus thinks than how I think, or how people around me think. Like, are these really thoughts that he would have, or are these just thoughts that culturally I would have, or me growing up the way that I grew up I would have? And so having this night where we were just, we're just dedicated to some simple things, just praying and fasting for us as a body, and for our family, and for on race issues, and then being able to hear from somebody that we would look at and say, oh, he's one of us. He's one of our own. We know him. We grew up with him. We're in relationship with him. I can dismiss stories out there, or stories that I read about, or stories that I've, found my way out of. But now with him,
right,
he's one of us, and we believe him. So maybe I can't just dismiss everything.
Yeah, that's right. Once you have an actual person to put, and not that any one of us, Josh and I were a part of a call recently where we were talking about how, one black man or one white man doesn't represent the entire, group of people. Right. So, I mean, I think that, but at the same time, it's easy to dismiss something as an issue that, it doesn't relate to my life or involve my life. And until you hear someone in your own life talking about something, and then you go, okay, well, if they're saying it, it must be true, or it must be something, and I've had experiences like that. I remember I had an experience with prayer one time where I was feeling like that the Lord was speaking to me, and that would have been language I would have never used before. And I remember talking to Lana, my wife, about it, and she told me a story that she had not told me before, where she felt like the Lord was speaking to her. And so I left that conversation, and I literally thought to myself, well, if Lana thinks that it's true, it must be true, right? And the only reason that I'd made that jump was because I went from not having ever really had the language to talk about prayer in that way to being more comfortable with talking it that way, simply because of one person in my life who I trusted, who had an experience that I could relate to, And I think it's a different issue, but similar idea to what you're talking about, Matt, with that. So, so that's good. So, well, we've taken longer than I expected of your time, and I appreciate you guys. But one of the things that I want to do is Philippians 2. This is for those of you that are watching. We didn't plan on talking about Philippians 2, but Philippians 2 has come up a number of times in the course of our hour-long conversation here. So I just want to read. I just want to read these words to kind of close us. Let this kind of be our prayer as we wrap up tonight, if that works for you guys. Paul writes these words: Therefore, if any of you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So there's a lot of themes in there that we touched on in this conversation, and we just say amen to that ancient prayer, and may it be so in our lives. And those of you who are watching, you guys hopefully got a sense of why I love and respect and appreciate my friendships with Josh and Matt and Jim so much. They have been voices that have shaped my life, and I hope will continue to shape my life for many, many years to come. And so I knew it would be fun just to have a conversation with them, and I hope that there's been some things here that you can take away from our conversation, and that will be a blessing to you. And certainly let me know if there's things you want to follow up about or keep conversations going offline. I'd love to keep digging in some of these themes and some of these topics and questions that we touched on with some of you. So I love you, church. Grateful for your presence here with us tonight, and I hope you have a great evening. Goodbye.
And Doug, feel free to give anyone my phone number. And love you guys. Thanks for listening. Wear a mask, and Black Lives Matter.
There you go.